You took one.
Is this it?
No. Did you say you brought more?
No, I brought more of this.
Oh, I have to make a copy
I
for
have it.
her.
I don't need it.
Maybe you guys can look together. I just want to be able to.
Here's
I can
mine.
just listen.
Copy, borrow mine.
No. We're only going to look at 2 lines.
I can listen.
Don't worry.
Oh, okay.
So, we're talking about faith and confidence, and what we spoke about last week, and I don't know what kind of impression it left, but it was basically an attempt to explain everything, using the model that the Arizal gave for the creation of the world. And if you remember, the main thing I think that came out was that nobody finishes anything. That's the main thing, and it's actually built in to reality that a Jew always feels that Hashem completes what he started. That's like the ultimate relationship between us and Hashem. It's true. It's very true that you need to do everything you can, and yet at the same time, the hachna in the nefesh, the submission is that Hashem gomer ba'adeinu, it's called. That Hashem completes for us. That what we start, Hashem completes. And even, it doesn't mean that at some point you suddenly let go and, okay, from here on out, Hashem, you finish. But rather, it's a feeling that in order to complete, I have to get over the feeling that something is left incomplete. And regardless of how hard I'll try. So like for instance, in this week's Parsha, with the Mishkan, that as much as everybody did everything they could, in the end, Hashem had to decide that he was coming to dwell within this Mishkan. That was something that nobody could do themselves. Nobody could force Hashem to do that. Now that's going to be a very big topic that we'll talk about. That what we're trying to do is we're trying to convince reality to bring out its goodness. But we're not trying to coerce it. There's a very big difference between the two. We're trying to make it fall in love with us and bring out its goodness. But we're not going to kidnap it and hijack it. And can you continue the imagery? And force it basically to be with us. And that's a very important thing to keep in mind all the time. That what we're doing is we're working to bring out a natural goodness. And when you bring out a natural goodness, you can only do that in a good way. You can't force reality to somehow bend over backwards for you. Okay? But Hashem can. Hashem does that. And bending over backwards is exactly that last piece that a human being can't finish. And that only Hashem finishes for us. He does that. One of the explanations in Chassidus for what Amalek is, what kind of doubt he instills in the person, is he instills the doubt that Hashem will really complete what I start. That's one of his forms of doubt, meaning that he cuts the name in half. By cutting Hashem's name in half, he's saying that the Vavke, that what we do, is not related to the Yudke, to what Hashem does, right? Because the Vavke and Yudke, one of the explanations is Vavke is a niglot, what we perceive and what we do and what we can see and do in our power. And the Yudke is the nistarot, it's what's concealed and what Hashem does behind the scenes. And what happens after we finish what we do. And so he wants to cut the name in two, and he says you have no connection. That's one of the reasons why he says that even this Shabbos that we just read Shkolim, and there's a whole question about why it's called Shkolim. It should be called Machatzit shekel. It should be called half a shekel, because that's what every person gave. So it's really called Shkolim. One of the, I think maybe 15 answers that the Rebbe gave over the years for why it's called Shkolim in the end is because what we're impressing upon ourselves is that we are a half a shekel from below, and Hashem is a half a shekel from above, and together they complete each other into a full shekel. So the idea is that I have ingrained in me the feeling that I'm only half. I'm always relative to Hashem. I'm only half, and Hashem completes. He brings the whole. He makes it whole. Okay. So that was one of the things that hopefully was impressed upon, that which is what in the Arizal's picture, that means that the line never touches the bottom. But that's not a problem, because if everybody just reaches where they need to reach at any given moment, we see the full circle. We see the contour, the silhouette of the entire Sovev, the entire infinite light of Hashem. It appears, but Dafka specifically from what we're able to not complete, meaning from that feeling that Hashem finishes it for us. It's a very powerful image for in general, for life. Okay, so now we're just going to read the paragraph from line 11 to 16. It follows then that the power of faith is the steadfast power of the psyche to remove unworthy, in parentheses, thoughts from one's consciousness. Unworthy is not strong enough. It's foreign thoughts. It's
What number is this? Oh, thank you.
all thoughts originate from one's will, also referred to as the flow of the psyche, and seek to fulfill one's imagined needs. These thoughts, a stream of one's power of imagination, flood the consciousness with vile waters. Maim Zeidonim, it's in Hebrew, and we'll talk about this word today, and are all the product of the evil inclination, the inclination to all forms and art that are vile and negative. Just that word vile, it sends shivers.
Oh, redo the letters and make it live.
Yeah, bring it back to life. So what is it saying? It's saying that we're full of thoughts. So we said one of the reasons, that's how we started last time, that the psyche is made out of letters, and these letters they're jumbled. So you have to order them in some way. That's how the Arizal envisions the creation of the world. He says that everything was full of letters, which in another way would be said with Hashem's infinite light. And Hashem wanted to order them. He wanted to make order out of chaos. But it turns out that you can't just take the letters and order them. That doesn't work. You have to, first of all, purge them. You have to create an empty space without letters, without thoughts. And only then, right, so we'll talk about this in a second. And only then can you begin to create order, to bring something new in. Now remember, we talked a lot about the soul coming down, and that the initial state is one in which everything is jumbled, right? Remember the 8 psukim, the last psukim of the Torah, that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the letters mixed up, bidmai, b'dema, and then after he passed away, they ordered themselves. So that works in the Torah, that works in the soul, meaning that works in the kav, when there's already a filling light coming down. But in the infinite light, it doesn't work that way. So what we're saying here is that these initial letters, none of them are coming from the Torah yet. They're not really coming from the soul. So we have to understand where they're coming from. So what he says here is that when we say letters, we mean like thoughts. That these initial thoughts, they're all coming from a negative space. And there's 3 different origins from which they can come from in the negative. So the first one is simply called Ayir Pere Adam Yivalid. That man is created in his youth like a wild, I guess an ayir is I was going to say the other word, but yeah. So not a nice way, because really it is the other word. So it's a young donkey. It's a donkey that kicks a lot, and you can't control it. So there is such a thing as just even when you start out in life, or even some, you wake up in the morning, everything's jumbled, everything's like a mess. It's not a mess of good things. It's just a mess. It's coming from what we call the animal soul. That the animal soul to begin with is tohu vavohu. It's in a state of chaos. That's its natural state. It's very seldom that you can find a person with an animal soul that is very directed and focused all the time. The animal soul, by definition, is naturally in a state of disarray. And if you want to be able to bring order into the chaos, you would think maybe the right thing to do is just to try to order these thoughts, just try to put them together, right? Decide what the plan of action is going to be. But because the source here is from the animal soul, it won't work for us. It might work for somebody whose entire picture is a naturalistic picture of reality, meaning that he doesn't have an understanding that the infinite needs to come down into the finite. He's not trying to bring down a new line, a new kav, a new soul into the world. He's not trying to attain a higher state. What he's trying to do is just to organize his life. Mm-hmm. So to organize your life, maybe all you need to do really is just take these garbled letters, and they're all mixed up, and all these different thoughts, and just sit with somebody, and they'll help you order it. So that type of, it's amazing that when Hashem created the world, even though certainly these weren't negative thoughts that he had beforehand, and yet still he purged them. So he's saying all the more so if your thoughts are from the animal soul. All the more so that you first of all have to create empty space before you begin doing anything.
Before you begin doing what?
Ordering anything at all. Before you begin planning a course of action. Okay? Because even if they were from a holy source, as it was when Hashem created the world, still he showed us that he didn't take the letters and just, that's a famous question in Chassidus, why didn't he just, if before the infinite light was filling everything, and then he pushes it to the side to create an empty space, why didn't he originally leave a line of infinite light inside? Because afterwards he pulls it down anyway. So the explanation is because if you would have taken it from the garbled, or the infinite light that was there already, and left over a ray that would be from that infinite light, it wouldn't work the same way. So it's a big question, why? Why wouldn't it work the same way? There's all kinds of answers given. So in us it's very easy why it wouldn't work, because what we have running through our minds naturally is our nature, is our animal nature. And so the instincts, their confusion is instinctual confusion. Meaning, what would it be? Like, what do I need to do first? Do I need to get a cup of coffee first, or do I need to brush my teeth first? But if I first brush my teeth, then the coffee tastes weird. Those are like the types of problems that you have when you wake up, right? You got, hopefully. So you've got all these, what am I going to do first today? And I'm planning right before there was ways. So how am I going to do this and everything? But these are questions that have nothing at all to do with the line, the ray of infinite light that needs to come down, and our mission in life. These, at most, these support life, but they're not life itself. Meaning the jumbled ideas in the animal soul, in the mind, the untampered mind, the one that has not gone through faith and confidence, the one who just woke up, these thoughts are coming from the animal soul. So at best they can support life, but they can't be life itself. They can't be the material from which you create your life's mission. They're good for sustaining you, but not beyond that. So that's the first source. The first source is just because the animal soul is constantly also, it's a soul. It has life to it. And because it has life, it's constantly moving. And it's like in the East, they usually describe it as a monkey. That's their image. That to calm the mind is like to try to rein in a monkey, like this just jumping all over the place. So that's their image. Our image is that we're not like them. We're like a donkey.
Much more realistic.
Yeah, we don't have that much energy. So maybe they have more. Maybe they have more. So this donkey is jumping up and down. Also, he's kicking in every direction. But yeah, he's not a vessel yet for anything. That you have to get out of the way. It's not going to work. Okay.
One question.
Yeah.
This confusion is before we say Modéani.
Even before you say Modéani, but it continues on if you didn't purge. Meaning, if stop in the middle of the day, I suddenly want to now start thinking. So I have to clean my slate and not be worried about, if you have little kids at home and whatever. So I don't know how you're not worried, but so maybe you do it in the evening after they've gone to sleep, or early in the morning before they wake up. You have to find some time to do it. So that's the first one. The second one is the second source of these thoughts, of these vile and terrible thoughts, which don't help us very much, and that we have to purge and cleanse out, are our self-involvement. How much we're constantly thinking about ourselves. And that, what do you do with that? It's different. It's not the same. It's not just like the first thoughts, which are just to sustain life. Here we're talking about the added benefit of being human. What's the big added benefit of being human? Self-consciousness. So I'm not even a donkey. Donkey's only worried about the next blade of grass. You got the next blade of grass, everything's fine, under control, calm down. But the person drives himself nuts because, and here maybe the right image is a monkey. It's already closer to being closer to a human being. And we're suffering from self-consciousness, from self-involvement. And instead of wanting to know Hashem, we want to know ourselves. Yeah. Instead of the Platonian idiom, which was know thyself, right? That's self-involvement. So the Torah says, Da'at Elokei Avicha. Know the God of your fathers. That's what you need to invest your consciousness and your knowledge in. The more the less you think about yourself, the better off you are. So what are you going to do all day? What are you going to think about? You think about Hashem. The famous story that I've told many times. Each time it's from a different context. Here it's perfect. That somebody came to the Kotzker and he said, Rebbe, I have thoughts of kfira. I have some thoughts of heresy. I don't believe such and such. So he said, yeah, so what? He says, you don't understand. I'm not sure that Hashem exists. He says, yeah, so what? You don't understand. I don't feel like I'm Jewish anymore because I don't believe in anything. I know that. So you're thinking about Hashem, right? Very good. Keep going. As long as you don't think about yourself. To that we have the opposite story. You all know also that the chassid who went around collecting, and then they didn't want to let him collect unless he said something that he's not a chassid, and he said, "Oh, the chassidim, they only think about themselves all day long, right?" So why is that? Because in the end, you revealed because the fact that God exists, that's a given. fact of whether I exist or don't exist, that's a chiddush. But obviously, he's not thinking about himself. He's thinking about how can there be that in God there exists something other than God. That's the question. He's not thinking about himself in the sense of who am I, unless we explain, and this is how we get out of this is the purging here. That the purging here is that instead of thinking about myself, I think about my mission. And that's not a give. That's a chiddush. To think about what my mission is. In any case, in order to be able to think about my mission, first of all, I have to purge out all my thoughts about myself. In order to begin to think about Hashem, I have to cancel out all this self-involvement and worrying about what is my place in the world. I cannot stress enough how this is the main ingredient of quality of life today. Anybody who wants a good life is to teach, the people that suffer from it the most are teenagers. And to teach them this is the biggest lesson in the world. To not worry about their place. It kills them. It kills adults who have some capacity to handle what doesn't seem to be going the way I wanted. Nobody's treating me the way I like it, and I'm not respected enough, and I'm not this, and I'm not that, But imagine a teenager has no capacity for anything, and they're, adults have the opposite problem. How do you find people to have a social life with? When you're a teenager, you're stuck with another 100 people every single day. And the only question you have is, how could you possibly have a private life? Again, it's completely, you're constantly barraged by this need to identify yourself within the group. And it's the worst possible situation that a person can find themselves in. There's a lot to be said for homeschooling because of that. But there's a lot not to be said for homeschooling for other reasons. But it's really tough. And if you just teach them this one thing, not to worry, not to concern themselves, because that's not what life is about. We all, the famous story that we also bring all the time, because I have no new stories, I don't read anything. That the young girl who told the Rebbe, I have no place in school and nobody likes me, and go do something for somebody else. What is that? That's changing your focus and not worrying about how I'm perceived, how I'm looked at, and so on, but rather worrying about what am I doing to benefit others? Am I doing anything to benefit? And the enemy of doing is self-consciousness. Self-consciousness is a person rubbing up against themselves. It's all about friction, and you can't do anything. You can't get anything done when you're worried about your self-image. So that's another source of these thoughts that are constantly running around in our minds. That also needs to be purged. And finally, and this is what he wrote here explicitly, is what's called Merutzat HaNefesh. And this is the main one that we'll look at. Merutzat HaNefesh means in Chassidus that there is an intense and constant want in the nefesh. Merutza literally means to run. But we know from a lot of words like eretz and ratzov vashov and other things that to run, even earth, eretz, means to want. Nirtzot. The first, just because I heard this yesterday, so I remember it now. The first word that a child says is Abba. Why? Not because he's talking about his father. Because an Av means to want. The first thing that the soul says is, I want. So he's saying Abba, he's not saying, it's just that Abba is the first object of want.
Oh, object of want.
Okay. It's the first thing that I want. Why do I want the father before the mother? That's pretty simple.
You already have it on the
Right. Because the mother and you is still one thing. But the father is a chiddush. So that I want. That's something worth wanting. But the mother I take for granted, so you don't say Ima first. But again, this is like just saying that in Hebrew, it doesn't matter what language the child speaks, it's still going to say Abba first. Abba, 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 Abba. That's the first thing you say.
Mine said Bubby first.
Ba. It doesn't, the ba sound. So the ba, the Abba, which it's even in Aramaic, it's not really in Hebrew.
Okay.
So it's just saying that the first thing that the soul expresses, that the psyche wants to express, is its want, because it's such a basic thing that every thing that is alive wants something. Yeah. So what do you want?
Your needs met.
Oh, sorry.
Your needs met.
So you need your needs met. That's like the ayir pere, maybe the donkey inside of me. What more do you want? Well, you want your recognition. That's the second stage that we talked about, the self-consciousness. What else do you want? Well, amazingly, everybody wants a future. The real merutzat nefesh, meaning to want something really is to be involved in the future. Every want in the end somehow is a conception of the future. I want it to be so and so.
What's that word in Hebrew?
Merutzat. Mem reish vav tzadik taf. To run. And the reason it's called merutzat nefesh is because it's hot. There's heat involved. As we'll see in a moment. There's a lot of heat involved in movement. In fact, it's also something that I was hoping it would continue to develop yesterday, but probably next time. That movement, by definition, is heat. Heat is movement today in physics. They're the same thing. They're two different ways to say the same thing. So if something's running, it's generating heat, or it's using up heat. On Shabbos, the shir that I give in my shul, so we talked about the Baal Shem Tov's incredible understanding of a Mishnah in Shabbos, that metaltalin, what kind of candle you're allowed to move on Shabbos. You learned this?
No, it's just if you're moving yourself as a candle.
So he says, he gets into this whole thing that you can move, according to Rabbi Shimon, you can move a candle that's new, but any candle that's used, you can't. You cannot move. So he gets into the whole explanation. He says that the reason, what this symbolizes is that a candle that's dirty, like something that's full of averos, cannot be moved on Shabbos. So what's the connection? So he goes to the Zohar, which is actually not even the Zohar. It's already in the Gemara. It's a very interesting story, this whole thing. How do we know that on Shabbos, the souls that are in Gehenna, they leave Gehenna? How do we know this? Well, it's a very interesting story in and of itself. We don't have time for it. And so it's a big deal that on Shabbos, nobody's in Gehenna. Gehenna's empty. There's no fire burning.
That's one of the reasons why we don't light the fire.
Okay? It's all in the pasuk in Vayankel, Lo teva'aru esh b'chol moshvotechem b'yom HaShabbat. You shouldn't light a fire on, why? Because, so anyway, the Baal Shem Tov says, so everybody's taken out except for somebody who's dirty in what? It says, except for somebody who's dirty in not keeping Shabbos. They don't get to enjoy Shabbos. Not only that, but he says that they continue to suffer from the fire on Shabbos. Okay. So the question immediately comes, what do you mean? The whole reason everybody leaves Gehenna is because there's no fire.
Right.
Why? So from the Gemara we learn that even though Gehenna is not a Jewish place, but the custodians are Jewish. They keep Shabbos. So they can't light the fire on Shabbos. They can't do anything. So everybody goes out. They have a day off. You'll see where this is going in a second. Obviously, this is all metaphor. They have to understand what they want behind this. So the custodians are all Jewish, so so there's no fire. But then the Zohar says right away that then a person who didn't keep Shabbos during their life, they do suffer from the fire on Shabbos. So where are they getting the fire from? It doesn't say in the Zohar. So the Baal Shem Tov completes it and he says, they get the fire from the people who are not keeping Shabbos right now. Imagine this.
That's horrible.
Really, how should you understand this? What do you mean? What do you mean light a fire? What are we talking about? What does that mean? That the psyche is constantly yearning for things. What do you not do on Shabbos? What do you not?
Not making a fire, so you're yearning for it.
You're not You're not.
Don't do evil talk and things like that.
You're not planning the future. The reason that Shabbos is I've already arrived. There's no future. Forget it. I don't need it.
Right.
It's Mein Olam Haba already. It's like it's the world to come already. So in the world to come, Kol Melachtecha Asuyah. Everything that you need to do, you're finished. You're done. It's complete. So there's no Merutzat Nefesh. There's no fire. They go together. There's no movement to the point where what's the pshat of Shabbos in the Chumash and the way the Karaites understood it. A person's not allowed to leave his house, or in the time of the Second Temple, there were tzdukim who said that this is completely literal, and where you started Shabbos, that's where you have to stay until the end of Shabbos. So if you started out on the couch, you can't go down you can't move to the dining table. Where you were, that's it. Why? Because there's no movement. So we say that's already that's not what the Torah meant. But it meant it in terms of how a person should see themselves on Shabbos. I'm not planning anything for the future. Why am I not planning? Because everything's done already. Everything's complete. Not because I don't have needs, but all my needs have been met. So the main thing is not to invest in my future. I'm not working in that direction. It's very interesting that also all the different stuff that we have with Shabbos clocks or timers and things like that, you can't change the future. State now so that in the future its state will change. But you can keep what there is. Okay? So, without getting into the whole discussion about whether you can touch the timer or not touch it. But the principle is that you can keep the state that you have right now, you can continue it for as long as you want. But you cannot change it into something new, meaning you can't plan ahead. So what's ahead, what's in the future, is Gwan and Shabbos. That's called that there's no Merutzat Nefesh. You can't. That's why even though lighting a fire on Shabbos is, according to many opinions, almost the lightest type of work that you can do, it's still singled out, and then according to other opinions, it's the epitome of what work on Shabbos means. Okay? It was singled out, so some opinions say it was singled out to say that you're not liable the same way as you are to other things. Other things, they're mamash, you're chayiv misa. But with Havara, it's only chatat, always. It's just it's a lower level of Avera on Shabbos. But the other extreme says, no, we learn everything from the fact that this was singled out. From how this is, we learn to all the other malachos. But in any case, this was singled out. To light a fire is because what's the idea? Because it implies movement. It implies planning for the future. So in order to plan for so what's it saying? It's saying that the soul, the psyche is constantly engaged in its future. You're constantly worrying about the future. And these worries, initially, even though they're a good thing, because what's the other option? You'll be a vegetable who doesn't worry about his future. That's not very good. And yet, that needs to be purged out. And those are really the sources of most of our empty thoughts that we need to purge, or the vile or incorrect or types of thoughts that we need to get out of our heads. Why? Because when I plan my future, it's based on my self-consciousness, my self-involvement, and the needs of the animal soul. So the only future that I can envision is a future that meets, again, the future that that my psyche is naturally running towards, that it's naturally heated up about, it's excited about, is the future that will take care of those needs. But I can't imagine a future where what I'm taking care of is my divine mission. That I can't do initially. And the whole purpose of faith and confidence...
What do you mean can't do initially?
If somebody tells me, envision your future, tell me about how do you see your future? By necessity, if I start thinking from right now, the way I am right now, the future that I'll imagine will be, meaning the power of imagination, will be predicated on my animal soul, on its various needs. And I won't be able to picture a future that's beyond my survival needs. I won't be able to picture the future that Hashem wants for me. Because Hashem looks at the person and he says, don't worry about, I know you're worried about it, but don't worry about it. Don't worry about your day-to-day life. Don't worry about your health. Don't worry about all these physical things. Don't worry about them. And why do you spend your time worrying about something else? What should you be worried about? Da'aga belevish. A person should be worried all the time about what? Whether I complete my divine mission or not. That's what I really need to be worried about. Good. So all these thoughts in the end are called machshavot zeidoniot or maim zeidonim. Where does this word come? What does zeidon mean? It comes from mezid. Right? Mezid means somebody did it on purpose. Purpose means it's willful. So all these thoughts are coming from our will, from what we want.
That sounds so egotistical, my divine mission. You use that phrase a lot, like my mission is divine mission. But that sounds very egotistical, my mission.
If you're envisioning it from the animal soul, you're right. But if a person envisions it from Hashem having sent him into the world for a purpose, then it's Hashem's purpose. I'm just completing
Very
it.
much the
I
second.
mean, don't you think, and you feel that comes from the animal soul or the godly soul?
No, the answers come from the animal soul. And the answers that I'll come up with initially, they come from the run of the Mechutzat HaNefesh, from the will, which is controlled by the animal soul. So that's why I want to purge it.
Okay, so all that struggling
Right.
needs to be purged.
No, not the struggle is good, like you said. The fact that a person is concerned about what is his purpose, that's a good thing. That's an opening for a great thing. But to answer right away is to answer incorrectly.
So we're going about it, all the initial thoughts are the wrong
Right.
thoughts.
Right. The initial, this we say a lot, right? That if you've come to the place where you can count on your first reaction, you're already a tzaddik. A regular person cannot count on their initial reaction
So those
because
are
it's
throwaway.
controlled by the animal soul.
Those are throwaway.
Right. So those we have to get rid of. But to really work on this, because it's not just one question, it's a whole series of it's a whole gestalt, I guess you would call it, of looking at my whole life. So I have to create an empty space here. I have to purge everything out. It's not very long. It's not like we're purging it for hours upon hours. It could be for a minute. It could be for 2 minutes. It doesn't have to be something that takes up most of the day. It's just a few minutes to clear everything, and then to allow a new ray of light to descend down. That ray of light, that infinite ray of light that will descend, will be from a higher source, from, call it the higher self, from Hashem. Okay?
Ever since you've been using this word
Higher self, mission.
it's made me so nervous. For years, this word mission.
Okay, why?
So I'm just wondering if I'm so egotistical thinking that mission has to be some grandiose thing. I mean, I remember you saying that missions can be the own little things
Mhm.
for short periods of time. It doesn't have to be the ultimate definitive mission. But
Even more than that, I'm talking to my son, and he has a problem, XYZ. So, my mission is to help him grow up. So to say the right thing, I have to purge myself from my first answer. My first answer is wrong. To be able to empty my mind and allow something new to come in, that's to perform my mission at that moment. It's not
And you might come up
80
with
years
the
of
same
life.
answer.
It might be the same answer, by the way.
Then you'll be a tzaddik.
But it came,
no,
Because it would be.
the
No.
tzaddik will be if I can, without purging it all. But then she's right that at some level, wow, if it comes out the same, so maybe, I can begin to trust my first answer. Maybe I can.
Or don't.
Still, it's okay to have doubt. But that could be my mission at that moment. It doesn't have to be, because obviously if I have children, part of my mission is to, those are things that are no-brainers, right? If you have children, you're supposed to be able to parent. To parent well means that I have to get something out of my head. Because even as a parent, I don't stop being myself. So what's my first concern? Leave me alone. What's the easiest answer I can give you so that you leave me alone? Again, that the buzzer sounds really hard when you do that. And luckily, usually it'll just come back. But other things, you might not get another chance. So the question is whether you're willing to take the time in order to do this, and it could be a very quick process. It could be a few seconds even, or just a few seconds worth. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but there's a minhag amongst, I guess, Chana Rachel Schusterman used to call them Rebelach. She didn't like it. She just said that that's what people call them. But the minhag by Rebbes in Borough Park, for instance, that when they begin to think, have you ever seen what they do? Anybody ever seen this?
Yes. Or they rub their beard.
I can't do it. But
Their eyes
they
roll.
roll their eyes backwards.
Mhm.
So what is that about? So there's a few different meanings to it. We'll learn some of them, but one of them certainly is that I'm purging. Like I'm like not here. Like I have to leave. And we'll see that there's a very important story that we'll see in the continuation, that one of the people that had license to enter the Rebbe's study whenever he wanted to, he once walked in, and he thought the Rebbe was with him. Apparently he looked at him, and he started asking something, and when he finished, the Rebbe continued looking and just said, "The person that you came to ask isn't here right now." But the Rebbe didn't roll his eyes for it. Apparently, he just doesn't need to do that. There's another reason why it's done. It's described in the Talmud. We'll see it later. But there's such a thing that I have to be able to empty myself from my preconceptions. And these preconceptions are all running from my animal soul in one way or another. So part of it is about my past. That's my donkey. Part of it is about my present, what I look like, my self-consciousness. And part of it is about how I am involved in the future, thinking about the future. And that comes from, it's already a good place, but it still needs to be transformed. It's still not really what I'm supposed to do yet. So each one of these sources gives rise to all these thoughts that are filling the consciousness all the time. And to be able to empty the consciousness, that's the power of faith. That's what Emunah does. Emunah is the power to empty the mind.
Why is it Emunah though? Why do you call it Emunah rather than something else?
Emunah is the highest part of the Keter. When I say the Keter, so it's not like I'm going to go out of existence when I reach the state of purging everything. But we said that the experience of being able to empty myself is one of complete faith in Hashem. That Hashem
It'll
is
still
good.
exist. I mean, suppose
That everything will turn out well in the end. I don't know how. I'm not sure. Meaning it's not just emptying in the sense like in the East that there's nothingness, but rather that there is only Hashem. Hu levadohu. He's all there is. V'kula kamei kelo chashiv. And the most important phrase in the Tanya that he brings is that everything before him is like nothing. Everything before him is like nothing. That's faith. So it's not, you could say, if it was just a physical or a psychological faculty that we use, so you could say maybe it would be the purging faculty. But here, that's not where we're headed. We're headed in the direction of there's only Hashem. Because if I cancel out everything, it doesn't mean that there's nothing here. On the contrary. If I cancel out everything, the substrate of everything appears. And what is that? That's Hashem who fills all, who's everything. All this that I call the world, and in my psyche it's all my thoughts, all my worries, all my troubles, all my preconceptions, so on and so forth. That's kula kamei kelo chashiv. It's like nothing. Meaning, when I exercise faith, it's like going back to a state in which I exist, but without this whole world that I've constructed. Okay. In the same way that if I would say the whole world cancels out, it wouldn't mean there would be nothing. It would just mean everything would go back to being Hashem. So in the psyche, there is such a faculty. The same thing as there is in Hashem, there's in me. Because Hashem created us in His image. So when I purge, I'm not left empty. That's not the feeling, that's not the experience. And we'll learn a lot more about this feeling. The state is a state of complete faith, which means, in principle, everything will be fine. It really doesn't matter what you do.
Does that mean like infinite possibilities?
Well, it could be infinite possibilities, but whatever you do, it doesn't matter. Everything's good. Everything's good. It's all good.
Everything for him is like nothing, is the same as everything's good.
I'm worried all the time. Why am I worried? Because I'm worried of how it'll turn out. To purge all of this means, really, in the experience, everything is fine. Everything is good. Even if I can't see it, even if I don't understand it, at its core, it's all good.
No matter what I do, or no matter how it works out.
Exactly.
Either one.
There's no pressure.
No pressure.
No pressure to get the right answer. Why? Because if I'm pressured to get the right answer, I'll be giving the answer. And I want the answer to flow. I want the ray of light to come down. Yes.
So is that the emptying? Is that the purging?
Right.
So it's actually not the nothingness.
No, not at all.
Filling it up with goodness and
Oh,
awareness
so
of-
that's the question, whether you call it, to call it filling it up with goodness is not good enough. Why? Because as much good as you'll put in, your animal soul is in control here. So it'll let whatever amount of good it wants. That's why we do call it purging. Because the point is not to fill it up with goodness, but to remove everything that's been created to reveal the substrate or the basis of everything. And the basis is good. How do you know that you've purged it all? that you fill with a feeling that it's all good. That's how you know. There's no worries. And somebody asks me a really tough question. It's a life and death question. A lot of pressure. To be able to answer, I first of all have to feel that everything's good. Meaning I have to get rid of all my machinations, as we called it, all my cheshbonos, how I'm going to make sure that it'll be good. Because it's not up to me. I have to get rid of all of my animal soul, everything that, all these structures in me that I'm carrying around and are there in place to ensure my well-being in the future, right? Or somebody else's well-being and so on.
But right after that, you have to believe that it came to you for the answer. So you have to believe you will be able to say something that will, you are there. You're
That's it.
not Hashem through you. I mean,
If you're really the shaliach. So when it comes to your kids, you don't really have an option. You have to say something.
Person you came
When
back
it's your
to
wife,
see
you
her.
better have something to say. Okay?
I'll go ask mommy then.
Okay, that's another option. But if somebody else comes to you and asks a question, who said that you're the shaliach? I don't know. Maybe I'm not.
isn't it if you can get to that base level, what you call purge, isn't that then most likely you are? If you're able to fill.
No, theoretically you should be able to do that. So that's what I said. I'm not filling.
No, feel.
I'll feel. So,
Wouldn't that be an indication
the fact that I
you're
can do this.
possibly the right person?
Let's ask a simple, differential.
Okay.
For whom is it easier to reach a state? Somebody who is indifferent or somebody who cares a lot?
Who is it easier for? Yeah, for sure. Okay.
If you're indifferent naturally,
I don't think they would come to you if you're someone who's indifferent.
you'd be surprised. Why?
They can
Because
cause you.
people cannot at the beginning tell the difference. Simple. We're in a fix. We've got a problem.
Hasn't Hashem orchestrated that as well, though?
Maybe, but you can orchestrate. We're in a fix. We're in a problem. Who do we want solving the problem? The guy who's going crazy, doesn't know what to do, at least besides himself with it, or do we want this cool, calm, collected character who is So we want the indifferent guy, but it could be that he's really indifferent. And you can't tell in the beginning. You cannot tell the difference. So really what I want is the guy who's, let's say it in terms of children, I want somebody who's full of fire, who knows how to calm the fire down. That's much more powerful
And rare.
and maybe rarer unless you teach how to do it. But it's not a detriment to be fiery. It's not a detriment to have a lot of mirutzat nefesh, to have a lot of thoughts. It's not necessarily negative. It depends on what the person does with it. On the other hand, there are certain situations where almost nobody can come to this feeling that everything will be good. And in that case, you'd rather have somebody who's indifferent. Yeah. There are certain cases where somebody who cares is just too involved. That's one of the reasons why usually doctors don't treat family members or people that are very close to them, because they can't reach that state that it'll all be good. You can't cut into somebody worrying. It's not going to work. So you have to have some level of indifference. You can call it indifference. But objectivity is another way of saying that I'm not involved. I'm not emotionally involved. When we say emotions, it's just one of the options. What we just saw is that there's natural, emotional, and even intellectual. Most of the thoughts are actually intellectual. They're not really emotional. I mean, there are people in their teen years where everything that they're worried about is only about teens and stars. Are the two types of people that worry all day about their image, right? Most people give up on their image at some point. But then you have these poor people that the industry takes, and they turn them into icons. And you, from now on, will be treated to a life's worth of worrying about your image. A terrible, terrible type of torture. Even in China, they haven't figured that one out yet. But so most of us give up at some point about really was my image like this, like that, would it look like this, like that. But most of the thoughts are intellectual. They are, how do I provide for my children when they get married? How do I provide for myself in old age? How do I this? How do I that? All these things. What?
Those intellectuals bring all the emotions.
They might bring emotions, they might not, or they might be caught up in them, but they're intellectual in this source. They're not emotional, meaning I'm not emotional about when I'll be 80 and won't be able to do anything. I'm not emotional about it. I'm worried about it. Do you find that that's... Yeah, it's a fear, but it's an intellectual fear. It's not like I'm afraid of something right now. It's something that comes from the mind. And most of these thoughts in an adult, they are what he calls here mirutzat nefesh, just the will of the Mayim Zeidunim. Mayim Zeidunim in Tehillim is always waters that are about to drown you. By the way, when you think about Yetzias Mitzrayim, and I don't know what time it is, so I probably need to end, right?
1:35.
Okay, I have to end, but I was hopefully going to get to this next time, that when Am Yisrael came out of Mitzrayim, the whole thing of Yam Suf, what does that mean? What does that literally mean? Yam Suf. This is the end. It's the end. Okay? What are they worried about? There's no future. And what did they say to Moshe? You want to take us out into the desert and kill us? There's no future there. You want to take us into Eretz Yisrael? There's no future there. Why? We moved from America already here. It didn't work out. Our forefathers, they lived in Eretz Yisrael and they had to move to America. They had to move to Egypt. It doesn't work out there. You want us to go back there? What are you talking about? So these worries, they had to get through them. You have to cross that again in English it's called a Red Sea because that's where it physically was, but in Hebrew it means the finite waters. And you have to connect back with the infinite. You have to see that underneath these waters that are about to drown you, there's dry land. It's not what it seems. That's a purge. That's an incredible purge. What happened there? It's like everything just moved, and suddenly you see that it's completely dry. It's not what you thought at all. It wasn't even wet. Because that's how good it is underneath.
And that's what Hashem said. None of your ideas are a good idea right now.
Okay.
South.
Right.
Yeah.
You just move forward. Okay.
And then soap is like kasuf.
What?
Soap that is like kasuf, like kasufim.
They yearn for
Then
something more.
Then it's switched around.
It says that they came out on the same side. There was no point. They didn't do it in order to flee the Egyptians.
To cross.
They didn't cross it. That's one of the big problems with all the guys who are looking for where it was, is that they don't know. And this is apparently not just a medrash. This is apparently mamash pshat. That the point of the crossing was not to cross, but to show them that Hashem can churn. It was the last makkah, if you want. It was the last plague against the Egyptians, to show them that even what you consider to be the laws of nature, Hashem controls. It's not what you thought. So there was no point in crossing, because then it would make it into, there was the only way to flee. No. He came back on the same side. The Egyptians drowned, and that was the end of the story. Okay, so there's a lot more to be said about this. So next time we'll continue with this idea of waters that are called Zeidonim. Zeidon literally means boiling water. That's what it literally means. So we'll continue with that.
Is it related in the charge, Sof and Kesef? Is it the same charge?
Sof and Kesef. It's definitely the same two-letter root.
Keter, not Kesef.
Okay. It's mamish the same two-letter root.